It's just like a lot of people aren't here. Um,
Did you clone the project? No. On the Slack channel, if you check up, you will find the Friday GitHub URL.
Yeah.
Friday project. I cannot get dependencies. I have a developer cannot be verified. Developer cannot be verified when I try to get the dependencies.
Never seen that before. Are you in Android Studio?
Yeah.
Try running.
Trash.
Try running Flutter Doctor. Hello. I don't know if this works. I don't think nobody can hear me. Audio. Oh, there it is. All right. Did you guys clone the repo? Or you guys have it? I think it's actually the week before we created that app. I don't know if you guys were here.
No.
Oh, yeah, the week before we actually went ahead and created that app. It's just like a simple UI app. It's supposed to look like this. It's very basic. Man, all right. So yeah, it's probably gonna try to make this quick, like 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So anyways, yeah, last time we were here, we did that app, and it wasn't much just coding, just kind of walking people through how Dart code and building UIs in Flutter, etc. And today it's actually supposed to kind of follow that what we did. So today we're gonna kind of cover stateless and stateful widgets, and also a little bit of declarative and imperative programming, because Flutter follows a declarative programming style, and then typically native Android and native iOS, they use imperative, so it's kind of different. Yeah, so this is the app that we created 2 weeks ago. It's very basic, just has a app bar and then a body, and with a list view of coffee items. Yeah, but last week we were doing it. We kind of just scratched the surface. It was just we used just the material widgets, and if you didn't know, actually there's like a lot of layers in Flutter, in the Flutter framework. And what we used last week to build that app was just like the material widgets, Cupertino, and then the regular widgets was just create your own widgets, extending stateless or stateful widgets. So yeah, we basically just kind of scratched the surface when we build that basic app. But the lower that you go in the framework, the lower that you go on the levels, you have like more control of what you're doing. Like you have more control of the framework, but typically you usually stay up there, which is more like an abstract layer over everything. And so actually like 90% of the apps that we build here in Absinthe, I think we would just be fine just using the top layers, just using all the widgets provided by Flutter in the Flutter catalog. That would be more than enough to build any app that typically the types of app that we build, they don't require much. But and this is actually suggested that we use just these tabs because they're highly optimized for performance. But yeah, like I said, if you go down, you have like more control, and it gets kind of more powerful that if you go down to these layers. So like if you use animations, or you can also paint directly to the canvas. You can actually access. You'll get like callbacks from the gestures, like the touch gestures. You can actually listen to all of those as well. So this is an app that I did. It's actually on GitHub. I'll post a link as well. And this one I used a lot of the lower level layers. So you can do like a bunch of crazy animations and transitions like this. And if you see, it's like just full of animations everywhere. I try to just go crazy with animations. So yeah, if you try to do this on a native app, it would be really hard, right? But with Flutter, because it gives you access to like the lower levels of the API, like you can just like the little wave right there is just like I'm painting directly to the canvas, and then the animations I'm listening to like the gestures, and then just moving the widget based on the gestures that get inputted. So yeah, you can do a lot of pretty crazy things with Flutter. But before we go any further, I think we gotta cover like an important topic in Flutter, and this is actually like a very it's a really important concept in Flutter, and it's very fundamental to the way that you write Flutter apps, and that is declarative programming. So do you guys know what it is? Declarative or an imperative?
Imperative, yeah, line by line basically, but what about you refresh or declarative?
Yeah, so I think nobody's here that uses React or React Native, right? So yeah, usually on the web or on the React, it's more like a declarative type of style, and then on native Android and native iOS, it follows more of a imperative programming style. And so here's the definition of an imperative approach: is that you have like just control of everything that you do. You tell the framework exactly what you want, and it'll just follow your commands. And so, yeah. And declarative, it's like you describe. You don't tell it what to do, but you describe it what you want, and it's going to do the work for you. And that's how it's kind of different. And so here's a quick example of like a Android activity, and this is like an imperative approach. So you get the so you're controlling a button, right? So you find the button, and then you assign it. You assign the instance to the button, and then you set the color, and then you assign a listener, and then you change the color. So you just control it directly what you want to do. And then, but here's the equivalent thing in Flutter, and it's very different in that the build method right here, it's what's actually going to build your widget. And so you just describe it that you want, whenever the status is pressed, you want it to be red, and then otherwise it's going to be blue. So you just kind of describe what you want, and then the framework is going to do everything. So if you see right here, we actually have a pressed boolean, which is like considered a state. And then to change that, we would have to call set state. So when you call set state, it's actually going to just run the build method again. So like you see, you don't control the element directly. The UI element, which is the button, you don't control it directly. You just call set state, and that's going to call the build method, and it's going to do everything for you. So here's like the very basic difference between a stateful and a stateless widget. So a stateless widget, it can never rebuild itself, and a stateful widget, it can rebuild itself. And so the stateless widget, when it rebuilds, it actually does it from an external source, not itself. And however, the stateful widget, you just call set state, and it's going to rebuild itself. Yeah, so last week I kept on, when we were building the UI, I kept on mentioning to everybody like over and over again that the build method actually gets called multiple times. You can get called like for any reason, like when the keyboard comes up or when something else happens somewhere else. You never know when it's going to get called. And so at first you're probably going to think this is like probably bad performance if this method gets called over and over again. But that's actually not the case at all. It's, like I said, it's very optimized to do this, and I'll go a little bit in detail later of why is it highly performant. But first, we're gonna change this so that I can kind of explain what I just covered. Alright, so all of this that we built was actually just stateless widgets. Like 100% of it is stateless. So, like I mentioned over here, is that stateless widget. It can never rebuild itself. It only rebuilds based on external sources. So we'll start off with like this one right here, this coffee price. This is a widget, right? And it's this little section right here. So what we want to do is we want to just maybe change this to, so we can pass the price in here. So we're just going to pass the price in here, and there's nothing that we can do with that. Like the parent widget that sends it, that gives it the price, it's going to be the one handling the build. For this widget, it cannot rebuild itself. So if we go in here and then we somehow try to change it, if we just create like a this is not going to do anything actually at all. Oh yeah. But either way, if we try to do that, if we call it from anywhere, you see it gives us a warning that it's immutable. So if we call this mission,
is the constructor, right? Like the constant copy price. Looks like they have a missing parameter.
Yeah, because if we try to change anything, it's got to be like. But either way, yeah, you can't change. Like if you change this state of this variable, it's not going to reflect on the UI. It's not going to appear at all. So you can change it as many times as you want from here, but it's not going to do anything at all.
You have to call a function, right, to force.
Yeah.
Notify or.
Yeah, pretty much. But since this is a stateless widget, and this final price is actually an external variable coming from somewhere else, then this method is going to be called if it changes, and it's going to rebuild it. So now if we go to the parent, which is this one, and we'll just say 10. So now all of these change to 10, and now every time we change this, it's gonna rebuild that widget. So let's do something a little bit more interesting. This is also a stateless widget, which is the card, this entire section right here. And so let's make this a stateful. And it's pretty easy, just click on the little light bulb and convert to stateful. So now we can create a variable that we can change. And we'll actually just start it off to 1. And we'll pass it to the child.
So basically, if it contains like data that can be changed, you go for stateful.
Yeah, exactly. The stateful widget can see. This is actually not. It extends a state, which means that it's going to hold the state of all the variables. So if you have like a list of users, list of whatever it may be, you put it in here, and then it's going to build based on the state. I mean, if you use it, of course. Like if you just declare it and you don't use it, it's not going to do anything. But if you use this, the UI is going to be built based on what is on your state. So I'm just going to wrap this with a gesture detector. And that gives you like a little untap method, so now you can listen to whenever the user clicks. And what we're going to do is we're going to call set state, and we're just going to add 1 to the price. Oops, backwards. All right, so now we're holding the state of a price, and every time that we click on set state, remember this stateful widget? Every time we call on set state, it's going to rebuild this widget. And then the coffee price, which is a stateless widget, and it only rebuilds itself based on external sources. And so the price is actually an external source. So that means that this widget is also going to rebuild itself because an external source caused it to rebuild. So now if we click on these, they should change. Yeah, there you go. So now each individual one changed when you click it. Yeah, so that's pretty much it for stateful and stateless widgets. You guys have any questions about this? It's pretty basic, right? So that's it just to go over. So a stateless widget can never rebuild itself, and it only rebuilds itself based on external events or sources. And stateful widget can rebuild itself, and it rebuilds itself when you call on set states. All right, so yeah, I keep on mentioning that the build method is always going to be run over and over again, and your UI is going to reflect what gets returned from this build method. So yeah, and like I said, it at first it seems like it might be bad performance if you do this a lot, but actually no, Flutter works a little bit differently in that, like I mentioned from the beginning, declarative programming style. You describe what you want, and the framework is going to take care of everything else. So in Flutter, you describe. This is actually the configuration file. Like it doesn't represent the UI. I don't know how to explain it, but yeah, this is more of just a configuration of what you want, and the framework does all the work for you. So this is sort of what happens on the rendering when Flutter is rendering a UI. So everything that we wrote on the Dart files is actually the first column, which is just we're describing widgets of how we want the UI. So yeah, that's all it is. It's just a configuration describing how we want the UI to look like. And then Flutter, you actually don't need to know this, but I think it's important to know like how it works. But then the next step is Flutter builds a tree of elements. which is the middle column, and that's this section right here is what does all the work, comparing, deciding where the widgets are going to go, how it's going to be laid out, and deciding what needs to be changed. So on the first column, your Dart code, the build method is going to get run multiple times, and then the framework, which is the middle side, is what actually calls the build method, and then whatever gets returned from there, it compares to see what needs to be built, what needs to be updated, what needs to be changed. And then the final step is what actually shows on the screen. And this is what actually uses the processing power to paint the UI on the screen. So yeah, there's kind of like a buffer. And this is why Flutter widgets are really that's why Flutter apps are really performance, because like even though the build method gets called multiple times, it doesn't affect performance at all, because it kind of gets filtered out as it goes along before it actually shows on the screen. So, the build method gets called here, but if the widget is exactly the same, pretty much nothing happens after that. But if like a text changed, or maybe the height changed, the height of the widget changed a little bit, then it's going to get passed down a little bit more. And yeah, this is pretty much the fundamental concept of Flutter. And with this, you can actually do so many things. Like I said, everything just gets built over and over again, but it doesn't actually get represent the UI unless it changes. And yeah, that's pretty much how you do everything. So like the crazy animations that I showed you, all it's doing is just calling the build method multiple times, and then it's just seeing that the values of like the width and the height change, so it's showing that UI. And yeah, that's kind of basic. When you also make like network requests, the first state is going to be there's like 0 data, and then the next state, you got maybe your data from the network. So it's going to call the build method again, and it's going to show what the data that you got. And yeah, that's it for today. It was a short and quick class, right?
It's the most important part, actually.
Yeah, it's like the core things of Flutter, yeah. So yeah, you guys have any questions?
I think we should make something.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this coffee app wasn't enough.
Then you show me about the example application like graph, like something like a table.
At what?
Another application that you showed in the example.
Oh, the beer app. You wanna see it? I actually have it on GitHub. You guys, I can post it later.
Like the fireworks and beer.
It's very powerful animation.
Yeah.
You can actually build games with Flutter, 2D games. Yeah, there's a couple of games.
Sorry.
Oh yeah. This is the beer app that I showed on the example. There is.
How about the size of that app, the beer app?
It's not. No, it's pretty small. Usually, it's just Dart code. The biggest thing is the Flutter engine, which is like 3 megabytes, I think, and then the Dart code is like a couple of kilobytes, megabytes if it's like big. Let's see if I can find the sort of. Yeah, I think this is all pretty advanced. I can't find like a simple example. So it's got a little handy way to like measure the handy function that gives you like the orientation of the device, like if they rotate it, and so you can actually just build the UI based on that. So you just check if it's on portrait or on landscape mode. Then it's just a simple if-else statements. Yeah, this one gets really crazy. That was the center widget. So basically there's like a wave that I built, and then also it has a bunch of bubbles inside of it, and all the bubbles are animating by themselves inside the widget. So it's got a list of bubbles, and yeah, I'll put this up on. I'll post a link for you guys. Alright, so this is one way to do animations is you have an animated builder, and all it does is basically just rebuilds on this builder. You're going to return a widget, and it's just going to rebuild this widget over and over again, constantly based on the animation.
You have already built in some animations, or you
Yeah.
just select them?
No. Yes and no. So like I said, the animated builder, all it does is just called build this widget over and over again multiple times based on the animation. And this can be anything from like a scroll view. So like when you scroll, you can listen to the events of the scroll, and you can put it on the animation, or you can just listen to the frame rate of the device. So 60 hertz, 60 frames per second? Mm-hmm. So you're gonna get like pretty much a function called every time the frame passes, and it's gonna rebuild the widget 60 times per second. Mm-hmm. And so yeah, every time that it builds, you want to change, like in this case, changing the height. Yeah, that's pretty much all it's doing. It's just, so it's like got like a container which is a certain width and height, and then it's building based on the height. So the height is always changing based on other factors, but it's just calling build over and over again, and the height factor is going to be a different value, so it's going to render based on that. Yep. Yeah. All right.
And you show how to download that APK.
Yeah, I'll give you you can just go to flutter.dev and follow the instructions there. It's pretty simple.
Yeah, like still show this download that APK.
On Android Studio?
Yeah, I install via home view and still show.
Yeah, let's see, can you come here? Anyways, yeah, so that was it for today.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.